Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 15th Field Notes Live event. My name is Lance Brewington, and I am the MLRA Soil Survey Leader here in Lawrence County, South Carolina, and the Field Notes Regional Representative for the Southeast Soil Survey Region. As a regional representative, I serve on the Field Notes Review Committee. The Review Committee solicits and selects topics for each webinar. We have selected two exciting topics for you today, and we encourage you to ask questions at any time using the Q&A panel. The Q&A panel should open by default. However, if for some reason your Q&A panel is not open, simply click on the question mark icon located on the right side of your screen. For closed captions, turn on the live caption button located in the lower right corner. Today's session is being recorded. Recorded sessions are available in Teams on the Field Notes channel, the National Soil Survey Center's YouTube channel. Again, thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed today's session. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Dave Hoover to tell you a little more about today's webinar. Dave?
Thank you. Hi, this is Dave Hoover, Director of the National Soil Survey Center in Lincoln, Nebraska. I wanted to start off talking a little bit about meandering. I've always been looking for a word that indicates what happens when you get on the internet and you start looking up one thing, and then that leads to another, and pretty soon you're way off from wherever you started. I always thought there should be a good coined word for that, so I was looking it up the other day. Closest I can call it's called internet meandering. So, for instance, I get to hear these presentations ahead of time when the folks are practicing them, and I heard something on the that's coming up here this morning on the soil temperature monitoring in Oklahoma. Well, that got me to thinking about the Oklahoma Mesonet. So I was wondering the density of these sites in the Oklahoma Mesonet, so I had to go look up the website and see where the density of the Mesonet sites were. And that led me to thinking about the first National Soil Moisture Network I went to in Kansas City. And I thought, well, what year was that? So I had to go look it up and look at the notes from that and saw that it was 2015. And then I started thinking about, well, that was the first time I heard about the NASA soil moisture satellite that they were sending up to look at superficial soil moisture. Well, what was that the first year it went up, or did I have to, or had it already been up for a year? So I had to look up the SMAP mission then and see when it originated, and it was 2015. And then I thought, and then we had that guy come out from NASA and talk to the group at that time. But was he from the Johnson Propulsion Center out in California, or was he from the Goddard Space Center in Maryland? And so I thought about that. So I had to look up, to see who that guy was. And then I started thinking about the Goddard Space Center, where he was from, and that made me think about, well, I used to drive by that one mall on my way out there when I worked out there one year. And that was where I got that really good chicken. What kind of chicken was that? It was a Peruvian chicken, I thought. So then I had to go to the internet and look up chicken restaurants near Goddard Space Center. And I found out that it was that Peruvian place, and found out the restaurant, by the way, it was the Pollo Cabana. And it had that really good chicken. And then I had to look up a recipe for that chicken because I thought, well, I want to make that because it's been a while since I had it. So I went from soil temperature monitoring to planning supper for the weekend. And that's what meandering is. And before I do any more meandering, I just wanted to encourage people to listen to these great presentations that we've been having. This is the 15th one of these, and let your minds go to all the places it can take you. Enjoy some meandering on the internet and look up things related to the talks, whether it's the soils or the climate or the animals or the geography, or even if it leads you to chicken places in Beltsville, Maryland. But I think this has been a great series for that, and I've really been able to not only learn a lot from all the presentations, but to also have it take me other places for learning. So today, as Lance had mentioned, we do have a couple of great presentations, and we'll get right to the first one. It's by Sara Russell out of the Gilmer, Texas office, and she's going to be talking about carbon sequestration, the science behind the free market. Sara, the meanders are yours.
Hey, thank you. And if I would appreciate it if you would just let me know if you can see my screen share when it pops up.
Sure can.
Okay, good. I had some issues earlier when I shared my screen with it. It took like a minute of lag time. I don't know why it was being so slow. So I just wanted to check on that. As Dave said, I'm Sara Russell, and I wanted to jump on the carbon bandwagon a little bit, but in a different way than most of the other people have probably been hearing about. Carbon, as everyone is aware, is one of the newest in things right now. It's one of the most widely studied topics currently in agriculture and environmental fields. Carbon is in market reports, it's on news feeds, it's featured in TED Talks and debated about among industrialists, educators, and farmers alike. But in order for me personally to understand a lot of the new research that's available, I had to start at a very rudimentary point, which is basically the beginning. So I'm going to ask everyone for a little bit of patience, as my talk is a little or a lot simpler than most of the other talks or papers that people will be reading and hearing. The author of a science book called The Canon may have been right when she made this statement. She wrote, "Water may be the solvent of the universe, but carbon is the duct tape of life." Carbon is the backbone of all living organisms, and it's also very important. It's a very important component in non-living things as well. Carbon binds atoms to one another, forming humans, animals, plants, and rocks. And if we play around with it, we can coax it into all different kinds of chemicals. Carbon rests at the top of the periodic table. It's sandwiched between boron and nitrogen. It has an atomic number of 6, a chemical sign of C, 6 protons, 6 neutrons, 6 electrons. It is the 4th most abundant element in the universe, after hydrogen, helium, and oxygen, of course. And it's the 15th most abundant element in the Earth's crust. Now, for this presentation, I'm focusing on carbon that resides in the soil. And in the soil, carbon occurs in 2 different forms, inorganic form and organic form. Inorganic carbon is typically in mineral forms, and these are the results of parent materials weathering or the reactions of minerals with carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Carbonates are a great example of soil inorganic carbon. Oops, I'm sorry. Many, though not all of us, have seen carbonates in soil profiles. Now, organic carbon is present in soil organic matter. This is available carbon as recent plant remains and inert carbon in materials derived from those plant remains. Examples of this are humus and charcoal. Most organic carbon occurs in topsoil, which is about 0.5% to 3% organic carbon. Now, since the advent of soil cultivation, which was approximately 12,000 years ago, an estimated 133 billion metric tons of carbon has been lost. This loss is what modern agriculture is attempting to somewhat remediate. Now, soil carbon sequestration comes in as occurring when carbon dioxide is removed from the atmosphere and captured in the soil. This occurs naturally during photosynthesis, or when plants take in carbon dioxide from the air and store it in the soil. Now, when carbon is retained in this manner in the soil, it's done so in the form of SOC, or soil organic carbon. This is what many call carbon farming or regenerative agriculture. Human encouragement of carbon retention and growth includes land management of farmland. Now, according to NOAA, the current levels of atmospheric carbon is about 410 parts per million, which is the highest it's been in over 450,000 years. These measurements were taken from glacier samples that were recorded from various locations to give the best estimations that NOAA can provide. The United Nations recommends that an ideal value for atmospheric carbon should be somewhere around 350 parts per million. It's also been reported that the number of 5 billion is how many hectares of land that are cultivated and managed worldwide. Now, 5 billion is a large number, and it does provide some hope that if soil carbon sequestration can become a worldwide focus, there are plenty of opportunities to turn the aforementioned numbers around. Now, this is just a graphical representation of the figures given from the previous slide. Notice the trend as it climbs in 2020 to reach 412.5 parts per million. Now, I know I said that I would focus on soil carbon for this presentation, but I did just want to spend a little bit of time discussing atmospheric carbon to depict an understanding of carbon as a whole. Now, when atmospheric carbon and soil carbon are debated, it's not always understood how different their capture is. Atmospheric carbon capture involves retaining the whole carbon dioxide molecule, which takes massive amounts of energy. For biological soil carbon capture, just the carbon element itself is retained. This takes just sunlight and plants, and it's a much more energy efficient, albeit natural, occurrence. To further illustrate the difference, think of it this way: 1 kilogram of carbon dioxide gas requires 1,147 times more space to capture than 1 kilogram of solid formed carbon. At this point, everyone's aware of the benefits of soil carbon sequestration. And to reiterate, they just include soil erosion reduction, increased soil health integrity, improved soil structure, more organic matter, improved nutrient cycling, greater crop yield and cropping systems, reduced evapotranspiration, and better water holding capacity and infiltration. What I'm concerned with today is mostly the role that NRCS is playing and will continue to play in soil carbon sequestration. We have a new focus, and it behooves all of us to work together to develop new techniques and also encourage producers and landowners to attempt different practices to help themselves. The following are recommendations that we are currently aware of that help landowners. These are largely fairly painless to implement without asking for a large investment in new machinery or expensive treatments. And this makes them realistic and more accessible options to most of the public. They just have to be made aware of these practices and also educated on the importance of why soil carbon matters. And these methods include mulch tillage, reduced tillage, crop rotation and erosion control, plant crop residue management, cover crops, tree planting, grazing management, and improvement in rice management. But there are some obstacles, and we as soil scientists or agronomists and range specialists, foresters, environmentalists, etc., we all have our challenges to overcome. Low participation is one of them, fear of adopting new practices, practicality, lack of education, and fear of bad management. These are all some of the obstacles that we face. One such concern is monetary incentive. Something else that people have been worried about is the fact that they're afraid providing monetarily backed carbon capture programs will result in landowners possibly breaking out their land out of a program like CRP just to plow it up and prove that they need carbon funds. That's just another reason that the standards and protocols will have to be somewhat fluid to address issues as they arise. But thankfully, we also have some help, which comes in the form of solutions like the promotion of programs, the education of benefits, and then also enhanced standards and protocols for people to follow. We do have some tools at our disposal, and one of which is the COMET program that was developed. And basically it's a program, or the COMET eFarm is a program that provides carbon footprint estimation for producers. And it offers landowners options to help them improve their practices that's based on their individual results. We also can't forget that soil carbon sequestration is not only for rural settings, urban areas are also in need. For example, lawns, parks, schools, and options like choosing adaptable grass species, or maybe not mowing as much. And since carbon is the focus and it resides mostly on sequestration, saturation, and market management, the USDA and NRCS have a really big job to tackle, which means that we do need help, and that's where everybody comes in. And since we're an organization of peers, we really do value feedback and everyone's knowledge and expertise. And if someone has an innovative idea or a new technique or just an interesting insight, we'd really like for you to share that with us. So people are definitely free to give me a shout out so that I can be aware of any other insights that you might have or any ideas to share. And with that, or do we have any questions?
Thank you, Sara. There is one in the chat. We'll give people a little bit of time to type in a few others. Just point of clarification, earlier in your talk, did you say pumice and charcoal, or were you talking about humus and charcoal?
I meant humus. Yeah,
Okay.
I did just eat lunch, so maybe that was kind of where I mispronounced that.
We'll give folks another minute here. I'll ask a question. So I agree with you that carbon has been the hot topic for some time now. Do you anticipate that carbon will continue its stature in the what we're studying and measuring, or do you think there's something new coming along?
Well, I kind of think both actually. Carbon has been a big push, not only nationwide, but also worldwide. There's a lot of industries now that are making companies are making their bread and butter off of trying to capture carbon. I did some research and saw that there are, I want to say, is it the Netherlands or maybe it's somewhere, or maybe Greenland, but they have developed these just massive chemical plants. And they're trying to figure out how they want to capture their carbon, and they're building huge kind of storage tanks, and they cost millions or maybe even billions of dollars for them to create these things. And they're trying to see if they're even feasible to operate and run, or if their outputs exceed what their inputs are. And I mean, there are all kinds of things cropping up everywhere, but I do anticipate that, as always, there's going to be other things come to the forefront, like urban soils are a big push now as well. And I mean, we always have new things come up, like DSP or rapid carbon back in the day. I mean, carbon's been kind of in the forefront for a while, but I feel like it's going to probably stay there, just in conjunction with other things as well.
Okay, thank you. Another question has come in. Has there been any thoughts on possibly including inorganic sequestration as a strategy?
Does that mean maybe like for NRCS to incorporate those?
I don't know, Sara.
I really, from what I had read earlier, it seems like NRCS's focus, and I could be completely wrong on this, but it seemed to me like a lot of their focus was going to be more on organic, because at the time, it seemed like that would be the most viable way for producers or landowners to come in and be assisted with like an inorganic practice, because something like conservation tillage or using mulch or doing something of that nature is a lot more economically or monetarily feasible for most people to do, and it doesn't really require them, for the most part, I don't think, to buy new equipment or make huge investments. And I think that in order to draw more people to cooperate with that, we're going to need something that's actionable for them to be able to really proceed with.
And it looks like they did add maybe a clarifying point that inorganic forms are more stable over time, though they don't have much soil health benefits. We could use this as a more reliable way to measure real carbon capture.
And that's a good point, and that's probably very true. Now, as far as if we're thinking of adopting any of those methods, I don't know, but that is something that definitely needs to be brought up, because I think they're still developing protocols, but that is something that needs to be answered for sure.
Okay. I don't see any more questions. If they do come in, we'll give you an opportunity to answer those, and they will be posted at our site. So thank you again, Sara.
Thank you.
I will remind folks that our next webinar is August 9th, where we'll have a couple more presentations. I also want to let folks know that we're starting to run a little thin on presentations. We want to make sure that we can continue to bring these sorts of presentations to you, but we need those volunteers from the field to present. So Lance brought up early on about the regional representatives. Get in touch with them. Bring a recent presentation or one that you've always wanted to present on, and let's get these down. I'd hate to have August or September come around and you listen to me read from soil taxonomy for an hour. So I think we can definitely improve on that. Our next presentation is going to be from Brandon Vaverka out of the Woodward, Oklahoma office. We'll be talking on soil temperature monitoring in MLRA 77E. Brandon, the floor is yours.
All right, so can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, first off, I'd like to say good job to Sara on presenting her topic. And my topic that I'm talking about is I'm just talking about what I'm doing here at the Woodward Soil Survey office. And as far as our soil temperature monitoring is going in MLRA 77E. I'm Brandon, I'm the soil scientist here at Woodward. And I'd like to point out some people that worked on this project in the past. So it's Chris Hobbs, Justin Morgan, and Jake Bashan. And this is a project that I inherited whenever I showed up here a little over a year ago. And a little bit of background history on this project is the first two sites were installed in 2009 as kind of a trial run to see how well they'll work. Then in 2015, most of the sites were installed, and then one had to get moved across the road because of a wind farm. But other than that, most of them have been in the same place for quite some time now. So why are we doing this? So first thing is estimating the mean annual soil temperature for NLRA 77E and finding a coefficient for estimating soil temperature to see if the old MAST equals the mean annual air temperature plus 1 degree C, or if it's some other kind of empirical method that we can develop for finding the soil temperature. And I'd probably say the main thing we're looking for is trying to find the Mesic thermic boundary so we can get ecological sites correlated correctly as well as soils classified correctly. But before we get too far, I'm just going to define Mesic and thermic if you're not familiar with those two temperature regimes. So Mesic is the mean annual soil temperature. It ranges from 8 to 15 degrees C with a mean summer and winter is 6 for the difference. Now the difference stays the same between summer and winter on the thermic, but it's a little bit warmer. It goes up to 22 degrees C. Now this is a map of MLRA 77E. Covers a pretty large area, goes up into Kansas and a little bit of New Mexico, but the majority of it's in this North Texas Panhandle and Oklahoma Panhandle. And all of the sites are within 77E. Now, this is just a better map to show exactly where the sensors are located in reference to the main office, which is right here in Woodward. And all these temperature points, there's no way to access the data remotely from them. So I got to drive out to every one of these and double check and make sure that they're all running properly and collecting the data. So I think that's a pretty good spread. Could probably be more even, but since we're focusing on MLRA 77E at the time, that's how they ended up in this pattern. So materials and methods, we're using onset hobo data loggers, and they're put to a depth of 50 centimeters. Is 50 centimeter soil temperature is what's needed to classify soils. And they're all in rangeland sites. And then once I retrieve the data, I filter it through my R script and then upload it into NRCS. And whenever these sites were being selected, we tried to make aspect not be an issue. So we tried to find a more neutral aspect and not a straight north or a straight south aspect. And we put them in these PVC tubes to kind of protect them, and then have a hole cut out here at the bottom with the actual sensor sticking out, and buried it, and also tried to pack some soil into the tube to keep all things consistent. And we do have 2 weather stations for rainfall, solar radiation, and then soil moisture. And we tried using these covers with the green caps, but rodents seem to like eating them, and we're frequently replacing them. So we're going back to just having just the PVC tube sticking out of the ground, or just placed in the ground. Now, issues and maintenance, batteries go out, moisture gets into the sensors, and once the moisture gets into the sensors, it shorts it, and you lose data, and sometimes have to just replace the sensors. I tried putting silicone packs inside the sensors to help draw in some of that moisture, but sometimes there's just so much moisture still, it doesn't do enough. And then pests are always a issue, like the coyotes carrying these green caps away. And this picture, it's like a rat got in there and had a big meal on that one. And then just making sure they're all covered up. But the biggest issue, because of all that, has to be the missing values, which is the heart of this presentation. So this is a graph, and what you see, these white strips right here, that's where we're missing the values at. So some of these, we're missing values for months on end, and there's only a few years of data here. So with missing data, typically you just want to have complete years, but we don't really have that. So I tried to find a method for determining missing values instead of just ignoring them. So I just picked a county. So I picked Lipscomb County, Texas. This one's missing a full year, which makes really good emphasis on filling in the missing values. And the first thing I tried was just filling it in with the previous day. Well, that may work for a few days, but once you get so far out, it just doesn't quite pan out. So then I went back to the drawing board. Then I came up with another idea. This one's more location specific. So I figured, what if I could find the average temperature for each day of the year at every location? So that was what I did. And then I filled it in, and that looks a lot better. It looks good, but then I was wanting to see how it looks statistically. So I ran some quick statistics. I just picked an arbitrary year, 2017, and Lipscomb County, Texas was a complete year. And the R squared value was really high. The root mean squared error was, well, higher than what I would like, but I think the year I picked, this cold snap, had something to do with the root mean squared error. Now, other possibilities, I've heard of using recorded air temperature, maybe some try to find some kind of formula there. I try using the previous year's temperatures. Then I was reading some studies of using artificial neural networks for machine learning to predict the values. And there's some other areas which I could explore to benefit this. Next, percolation techniques. Because I thought looking at the points was neat, but I figured it would be even cooler if I could make it into a map. There were a few things I tried to make a map and see how it all laid across the land. So the first thing I tried was nearest neighbor. I did that using R to, I'll make a quick interpolation. And just a few things I did in grad school doing crop modeling. And the next one I tried was inverse distance weighting. And the last one I'll talk about will be the empirical Bayesian trigging, which was new to me. Typically I'd use ordinary trigging, but I was going through ArcPro and saw that they had a function for it and it was easy to use, so figured I'd try it and include it into this presentation. All right, so some things about the nearest neighbor interpolation. So you create a Voronoi diagram or proximity polygons, and what the proximity polygons are doing is they're calculating up how much area each one of those sensors is representing. And a few things to keep in mind is the nearest neighbor sites have no influence on each other. So each one of those polygons is separate from the others. And it's estimating the neighborhood for each specific site. That one good thing is it's really simple to use. So this was my nearest neighbor interpolation. I made up in R, and then I rasterized it and then imported it into ArcPro, and it looks about the same. I mean, you can see the general trend where it's cooler up here around Boise City and up in the Panhandle, which is what you'd expect, but in between, I didn't really find it was all that useful of a representation. Which led me to the next thing to try, which was inverse distance weighting. Inverse distance weighting assumes things that are closer or more alike, and in between the points you can adjust the weights or the power factor on how far those values are carried out. And this gives greater weight to the prediction point. And inverse distance weighting works best with evenly distributed data. Because if you don't have it evenly distributed data, you're more likely to pick up some artifacts in there. This is what it looks like whenever I tried inverse distance weighting. So the green is the cooler, red's hotter, then it goes to white. And this shows a better representation of how it's looking out there. But we do have a artifact kind of starting right there on Valhart. That's probably because the density of our stations isn't that even, and that's mainly because we were trying to put these sensors in within MLRA 77E. And lastly, the empirical Bayesian trigging. So you're used to ordinary trigging. This is a little bit different. So the semi-variogram parameters use restricted maximum likelihood instead of weighted least squares. But the benefit to that is it's easier to apply, a little bit slower, but it didn't seem too bad running it in ArcPro. But the biggest thing is co-trigging and corrections aren't available. So like if you wanted to run this with a DEM side by side or maybe a few other covariates, you can't add it in there whenever you're running it. You have to run another trigging method. This is what I got. I like this because it broke it down more into categories. This was just the first run, and I put it in there into this presentation, but it could use some smoothing, but I liked how it broke it down into nice, more categorized areas. Now, conclusions. Now, what I found was filling in the missing values appears to be the best practice for the data set, given the limited number of years. averaging day of year temperature is somewhat useful, and I think it would be something to include if we didn't have anything at all. And need to explore more ways to estimate the missing values. And right now, empirical Bayesian kriging is the most useful representation for the project, just because it breaks it down into more categories to define ecological sites and that sort of thing. And need to work more with the parameters and the interpolation methods. So just adjusting a few things from there to make a better map. And something I'm going to try this fall is setting up a generalized linear model and adding DEM and location specific parameters and maybe a few other covariates that I find to better represent the area. Any questions?
Thanks, Brandon. Looking now, not seeing any at the moment. We'll give a minute or so for folks to send them in. Again, people can put these in and we will get them answered. You presented some great topics and but a lot of math in there. So maybe folks need time to digest that a little bit too. And we look forward in another 6-10 months or something like that, hearing where you've gone further with this.
Down this fall and back through my scripts and if I can build a better one.
I'm sorry, Brandon, you were real faint on that response.
Oh, I was just saying that I'm excited too to sit down and go back through the data and see what I can improve on this fall.
Okay, a couple questions did come in. One is, did you consider using other statistics for day of year temperature? Perhaps the median would be less sensitive to extremes.
The region at noon every day, so instead of doing hourly and then averaging and finding a mean for each day, we just do one. And that's why I didn't use a median, because we're only taking one temperature a day. We started off trying to do hourly data, but the data loggers would start to fill up with data before we could get to them. And looking at the previous data, the diurnal flux wasn't an issue. So we just started doing one reading a day.
Okay, and another question, how did you upload the temperature data to NRCS?
There's a Excel spreadsheet to upload it into NRCS. So you fill out the Excel spreadsheet and then use the upload feature in NRCS to get it on there. The Excel spreadsheet is kind of sensitive to what is on there, so I made an R script to filter everything, so all I have to do is just copy and paste it in there. Into the Excel script and then upload it. I mean the Excel spreadsheet.
Okay. And one last one, and you can comment on this or respond later, that they're suggesting that you simply average the Julian days and I lost it now. Average the Julian days and then average the year. Otherwise, you could use something like a regression spline and include covariates like Prism. Okay, we'll add in one more question quick one here. Have you considered using SDI 12 sensors instead?
Yeah, but I'll look that up. What were they called?
SDI 12 sensors. Not
Okay.
familiar with those myself.
Into those. Good comments.
So I think what we need is for whoever submitted that question to add a little bit more information, add it to the chat, or to send it directly to Brandon via Teams or something, and he'll be able to address that. And that concludes our 15th Field Notes webinar. Thank you all for attending. Thanks for your attention and your questions. Thanks to both presenters again, Sara and Brandon. And a reminder, two reminders. One, get your ideas for and volunteerings for other presentations into your regional coordinators. And also the next webinar date is August 9th. Have a great week, and we'll see you in a month.